Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Erica Williams, the Deputy Director of Campus Progress, and I'm so delighted to see all of you here today to answer the question, is college only for the rich? And to kick us off, before we have our wonderful panel, we are graced with the presence of Congressman Tim Bishop. He represents New York's 1st Congressional District and is proud of his record of hard work and effective constituent service. He works 7 days a week and has hosted more than 100 town hall meetings throughout his district. Congressman Bishop's focus is protecting Long Island's middle-class families. And his priorities in Congress include improving our economy, fighting for veterans, safeguarding the environment, strengthening access to education, and reforming health care. He is a member of the House Transportation and Infrastructure Committee, the Education and Labor Committee, and the Budget Committee. So without further ado, please join me in welcoming Congressman Tim Bishop.
Thank you. Good afternoon to all of you. And I should tell you that part of my background, in fact, my entire adult life before I came to Congress was spent on a college campus. I was a college administrator for 29 years, and I spent a number of those years as the director of financial aid at the school at which I served. I think I am the only member of Congress to have actually administered Title IV student financial aid programs. Let me answer the question that you are going to be considering over the next several hours in this fashion. I don't believe that college is only for the rich, but we are in danger of that eventuality coming to be if we don't each do what we are required to do. It is a multi-legged stool. The federal government has its piece, a subject I will come back to in a moment. State government certainly has an important piece, both with respect to the extent to which it supports public education and also the extent to which it supports student financial aid programs in the state. The institution itself has a piece, both with the extent to which pricing is determined at the state level and also for private colleges. And also the extent to which private colleges and state colleges provide resources from their own, provide funds, from their own resources to for student financial assistance, whether it be funded aid or unfunded aid. And lastly, the way in which the needs analysis is constructed and the levels of contribution expected from family incomes, part of the federal piece, is a crucial component. In other words, that is to say that the expectation of family contribution has to be realistically and prudently arrived at. But let me talk about the federal piece because, and I will do so briefly, I know you want to get to your panel, but I am very proud of what the federal government has done with respect to access and affordability since January of 2007 when the Democrats became the majority party in the House and in the Senate. We have passed several pieces of legislation, all designed to enhance access and affordability. We have reduced interest rates on student loans. We have increased the Pell Grant maximum not once, but hopefully once the Senate passes SAFRA twice. We have made several changes to the needs analysis system to see to it that it is a more realistic system. We have expanded Pell Grants. We have expanded, we hope, with the passing of the SAFRA legislation, access to Perkins loans. We have, in the stimulus bill, increased funding for college work study. In the SAFRA bill, we once again establish a federal role for supporting cooperative education, which is a program that has both an academic dimension and a student affordability dimension. So we have made great progress, and we have done so without adding a dime to the burden of the taxpayer. We have done so primarily by virtue of reducing first the subsidies that we provide to the student lenders to participate in the FFEL program. Thank you. And then further, if we are successful in passing the Student Aid and Fiscal Responsibility Act in the form in which it currently exists, we will do so by virtue of eliminating the FFEL program and moving to 100% direct lending, and in the process of doing so, saving approximately $9 billion a year, which we will put into the hands of needy students, as opposed to have that money contribute to the bottom lines of student loan providers. We will increase Pell Grants by approximately $40 billion over a 10-year period. We will increase availability of the Perkins loan by a factor of at least 3, if not 4. We will have money that will support school construction. We will have money that will support an investment in early childhood education, and we will have money that will support an investment in community colleges, and we will have money that will support both state efforts and individual college efforts to invest in success, to invest in completion. To my knowledge, the first federal investment outside of an occasional Title III proposal in retention, something that's vitally important. And the community college piece is, to my knowledge, the first significant federal investment in seeing to it that community colleges have the capacity and the wherewithal to support the growing demand that currently exists. We are in the ironic position of demand for community colleges exploding at the very moment that the capacity of state and county budgets to support those colleges is imploding. We have to fix that. The community college has been one of, I think, along with the GI Bill, the two principal means of access for higher education since the end of World War II, and we cannot let that access be diminished. So I am cautiously optimistic. I am confident that the federal government is doing the right thing. I am troubled, or let me say it differently. I have anxiety with respect to the capacity of the state governments to continue to support public education as they now do, and to continue to support student financial aid programs as they now do. I am confident of the ability and the willingness of private colleges, independent colleges, to continue to offer significant resources from their own means, whether it be from endowment or from simply discounting tuition, to enhance what is available from the federal government and the state government. I'm delighted that you are studying this issue. I think it is absolutely crucial to our future, and I think public policy makers at all levels have to have as one of their highest priorities seeing to it that that people at all income ranges and at all age levels have access to their slice of the American dream. And the way they get that slice is through education. Good luck to you. Thank you very much.
Really appreciate, is the mic on? Good. We really appreciate Congressman Bishop taking the time to come out and talk to us this afternoon about, is college only for the rich? And that's, a very provocative question, but one that's really relevant right now in light of what's happening both nationally, at the state level, institution-wide. It's a question that many Americans are asking themselves, their elected officials, their families, their professors, every single day. The president has made very clear that education is one of his top priorities, a top priority for his administration. He set forth the ambitious goal of having America be #1 in the world at the rate of graduating college graduates. And so that with that ambitious agenda has also come some ambitious legislation that's being proposed, is pending and moving right now in the Senate as we speak. And that's the Student Aid and Fiscal Responsibility Act. This piece of legislation, which we'll talk a little bit more about later, stands to reform the student loan industry and also at the same time dramatically increase the amount of student aid that's available. So clearly this conversation is moving at a rapid pace at the national level. But over the past several weeks, we've also been able to see how this debate plays out at the local level. what this fight to make college more affordable actually looks like on the ground. Several weeks ago, the UC, the University of California Board of Regents, approved a 32% tuition increase. Yeah, I heard a wow. Wow, a 32% tuition increase. Students were obviously outraged, but not only were they outraged and angry, they were mobilized, they were energized, they were activated, and made national headlines with protests that lasted days across the entire system on multiple campuses. Students really made their voices heard. And so we're able to look, in light of both this kind of national landscape and also a local, statewide, and institutional landscape, at this question from two different perspectives, and hopefully come to some answers today. Is college only for the rich? If, as I hope many of you believe, the answer is no, we want to talk a little bit today about how to see forward an agenda that, again, makes college more affordable and accessible for all. So that's the frame for today's conversation. In order to help us move through that discussion, we have some wonderful panelists here. We'll start all the way on the end with my colleague, Pedro de la Torre. He's a senior advocacy associate here at Campus Progress who has worked for several years on the issue of college affordability, access, and student debt. Prior to that, Pedro himself was a student activist at University of Texas, where he participated in, kind of watchdogging. He didn't watch dogs. Legislation and campus administration there. Also, next to Pedro, we have Angus Johnson. He's a historian of American student activism and of student life and culture more broadly. Angus particularly is interested in student activism beyond the 1960s, in the history of student government, and in the role of students in the university. He also maintains the website studentactivism.net. Next to Angus, we have a student activism hero for us, Victor Sanchez. He was born and raised in Los Angeles, California, and is a fourth-year undergraduate at the University of California, Santa Cruz. He currently serves as the president of the University of California Student Association, the official voice of the over 220,000 students attending the University of California system, advocating for access, affordability, quality, and diversity at our institution. And last but certainly not least, we have Mr. Bruce Kane. He's the Heller Professor of Political Science, the Director of the Institute of Governmental Studies, and the Director of the University of California, Washington Center, based here in our nation's capital. He has commented on elections, the recall, presidential politics, the census data, economic stimulus plan, and today we'll also comment on the issue of college affordability from the perspective of the administration. So thank you so much to all of my wonderful guests, and I want to start with you, Victor. I laid the groundwork a little bit in kind of broad strokes as to what just happened in California, but from your perspective, what happened?
Well, I think, and this is something that I think needs to be made known, is that what we're seeing is the beginning of a new student movement, a new era in student activism that has kind of emerged out of California. Since 2001, up until before this last 32% increase, our fees have increased over 160%. This last May, we saw an increase of around 9%. And just a few weeks ago, the Regents proposed and passed a 32% increase to what is supposed to be our public education. So what we're seeing right now is really a lot of anger over what is going on with our public institution. And right now, you're really seeing mobilizing around the resistance of it turning into more and more of a private university system-like structure. And I think for us, the idea and the mentality is that education should be a right and not necessarily a privilege. And right now, we are seeing students, being turned away. The dreams that they have kind of worked towards, and staying throughout public education, are kind of being shattered at the last moment. And money being the main factor of them being able to attend our university, and that becomes a big issue. Because what's at stake here for us is more than just our institution, but the future of our state. As many of you all know, California is the 9th largest economy in the world itself, but a lot of that is really attributed to our institutions of higher learning. The last 20 years, we've seen a drastic disinvestment from the state. Earlier, we heard comments about the role that state government needs to play in funding higher education. Well, quite frankly, right now in California, we are just not seeing anything near sponsorship for a public institution. It's kind of shift to a more supportive mentality. Fees are now going to be at around $10,300. So students will be contributing $10,300 to their public education. That's upwards of around 1/3 the total cost of revenue needed to run the total university. And we can see that just no longer is a state-sponsored system. It is a state-supported system, right? It is you know, a little bit of money here and there. But for the most part, the burden is falling on the backs of the students. The budget of our state, as you all know, California is going through a big budget mess, and we always are, unfortunately. But the budget is constantly being balanced on our backs. And what we're seeing is that, you know, a lot of populations, specifically those who come from low-income families, as well as communities from underrepresented, historically underrepresented communities of color, are being pushed out of our institution. And you know, it's directly in defiance of what the California Master Plan for Higher Education sought out to kind of establish for California back in 1960. And so overall, you're seeing a lot of anger. I mean, you're seeing a lot of anger. You know, the opportunity is dwindling. And, you know, we can hear the arguments that financial aid is being provided, that financial aid is going to be readily available. What we're kind of saying is that we do not want to go down the path where higher fees continue to be raised, and the excuse for us is that more financial aid will be coming, because when it comes down to it, that financial aid comes from our fees to begin with. And we do not want to have a high fee, high aid model in California. We do not want to have an institution that is guided by privatized notions, right, of what an institution of higher learning should be. We want a public institution. And for us, a lot of the mobilizing that has been taking place is an effort to try and make the case known to the public of California that their university system is at danger, and that the future of our state is in danger. And I think the implications are broad, and we're seeing this all over the nation. I mean, in Mississippi, we have 3 HBCUs which are in danger of being, put together into one, and that's a big problem because these institutions are avenues for which a lot of students seek to reach their aspirations. And right now, it's a beginning of a shift, and I think just a kind of anecdote, just to kind of watch to see what is next to come, especially out of California, what we'll be doing. But more importantly, again, to kind of just go back and answer your question more directly, it's a beginning of a student movement. It's a movement against the privatization of our public institutions here in the United States.
I want to talk more about that student movement. I'm going to come to you, Angus, in a minute about that. But before we get there, let me get the other side of the story. So Bruce, from your perspective, not just what happened there. We saw the protests. We saw it all over the national news. But how did we get to that point? How did you get to the point? And I say you, but not you, the administration and the regents. How did the Board of Regents get to the point where tuition was raised 32%? What's the context?
Well, the larger context is a political context in California that has different pieces to it. If you look at spending on higher education in California, and indeed a lot of other states, as a fraction of the personal income in the state, it's been going down. What's happened is it went down faster in this crisis, but it's been going down for a long time. So this has been going on. Why has it been going on? What is the cause behind the long-term decline? Well, there are many, but I'll just mention 3. First of all, we do not play the campaign finance game. We are not a player the way the prison guards are. We're not a player the way the teachers and the nurses are. You look at the top 10 PACs, you're not going to find higher education. And it's a dilemma. And I'll be interested in your view of that. Because either we get ourselves dirty and we go in and play the game that we publicly decry and give financing to legislators in order to get them to pay, or we take the position of purity, which we've taken, and then we get screwed. So you choose. We have had a hard time choosing as a faculty. We're divided, we're ambivalent, we haven't been able to act. But if the students have a view, let us know, because we're torn on that. Number 2 is term limits. For many years, we were able to create relationships with people in the legislature. And since we don't give money, those relationships were very important. We had people that believed in us, that understood our mission. We could go to them every year and lobby and explain what we were trying to do. What do you do when you change people every 6 years and every 8 years? So that you don't have all the education efforts that you did in previous years don't carry over. That's a real problem. And we didn't solve that problem. And I don't know how we solved that problem because nobody wants to change term limits. I personally have campaigned. I lent my name to mailers trying to undo the term limits problem precisely because I saw how it affected the university. But you guys weren't there, okay? And this gets me to my point that you guys have to be part of the broader political context. You can't simply be focused on the administrators, some of whom I admit haven't made a strong enough case for public education, strong enough, haven't been out there enough. But you guys have to take the larger political context seriously because that's what's killing us in the long run. Now, in the short run, have we made mistakes? Yeah. Should we be paying huge salaries to administrators? No. Or at any rate, if we do have to pay them high salaries to get them, we should treat them like football coaches. That is, we should pay up to about $200,000 with state money and then go out and raise money from alums or whatever to pay for our superstars. So we should be thinking about how we do that, because it's very hard to the taxpayers to say that we have to pay a lot of money for superstar professors or for administrators that is in excess of what we're paying the governor. Okay, so we've made short-term mistakes, but it's the long-term picture that's killing us. We may get bumped back up again if we get prosperity, and I could go on about all the fiscal problems, but let me mention one, which is because it's on the relationship between the federal and the state. The federal government, ironically, did us no favor when they gave us the stimulus money. Because what happened is that stimulus money was earmarked for, or not earmarked, but was targeted towards research. So it went to the scientists who don't teach a lot of people, but do valuable research. So when we got that money, that stimulus money, the legislature said, well, you guys just got hundreds of millions of dollars. So where are they going to cut? They're going to cut in gen funds. What do gen funds finance? They finance undergraduate education. So those of us who did not get stimulus money got cut proportionately to the money that came in from the federal government. So there's a lesson there. I mean, it's part of a larger problem, which is the federal government is pursuing a Keynesian strategy of spending to get us out of the recession. The states are pursuing a Republican strategy of spending less in order to make their budgets balance. So this is just one piece of that larger picture. So my overall point is, I share your pain. Believe me, I don't think it's fair that you guys have to pay more. I worry about how that distorts the careers that you guys are going to pursue. I think it's unfair. 30 or 40 years ago, we didn't have to pay off loans the way you guys have to pay. I think all that has to be changed. But you're not helping us if you're only going to complain about UDOF and not look at the broader picture. You have to have a broader political agenda.
Victor, what's your response to that?
So, I think, and I know Angus can probably talk about this, but it's not like we just came out of the woodwork. Students have been organizing for years. I mean, the United States Student Association has been around for over 50 years, and organizing what we've been doing. And I think, I think oftentimes people mischaracterize what is going on, in student activism, and kind of have a naive perspective in thinking that, I've heard this a lot. I've been on NPR and a lot of other media outlets, and I've had, people from the public come up and tell me, oh, well, y'all are focusing on the wrong target. The issue is the state. Well, when it comes down to it, it's a collective responsibility. Because for us, there's been mismanagement of our university system. And I'll give you the example. The 32% increase was put forth and passed without even knowing how much revenue or how much money the state was going to give to the university system to begin with. And that is a big issue, is that the UC didn't give themselves a fighting chance to advocate to who they were saying was the ultimate target, which was the state. And we understand that completely. We understand that it needs to be a collective responsibility, that the targets need to be the UC administration, as well as the state legislature and the governor, most importantly for us. And that's what we're doing, and that's what we're looking forward to in March. Another thing is that our state, and I know this is a national trend, we lack real leadership. There's no more vanguards. There's no more champions for higher education. There's no more champions for education like what we saw in the Kennedy era. Back then, we don't have those figures there that are at the state advocating for us. And so there's a need for us to make sure that our voices are heard in whatever manners are possible, but albeit very organized. But we need to make sure that those opinions are out there in the public sphere. So, whether or not it's addressing UDOF, whether or not it's addressing the UC administration and the state, we can't keep pointing fingers, because when it comes down to it, it's a collective responsibility. There's a problem in California. We're number 1 in prison spending, 48th in education. The state funds prisons more than it does the community colleges, the California state universities, and the University of California combined. That is an issue. What's at stake here is a prioritization problem, and not necessarily one that, yes, it is rooted in the financial crisis and what we're going through, but there's a lack of priorities, a lack of leadership. And for us, we understand those problems. We understand which channels and where to put our energy in. And I think we have a whole year left, and I know this is something that Angus is going to touch on, so I'm just going to stop right here. But this is the beginning of what is supposed to be a decades long student activism. You all haven't seen anything yet, I think. But this is definitely the early stages of what we are hoping for is going to be a new fight for our generation, right? The fight for an accessible, quality, and affordable university, if not education system here in the United States.
Let me jump in and ask Angus. So, what is your perspective as a student of student activism? Kind of what is the history of this type of not just protest, but this type of strategic organizing? What does it look like also outside of California right now?
Well, I think one of the things that's really important to note in terms of a difference between now and the 1960s is it's often forgotten that people aged 18, 19, and 20 didn't get the vote in the United States until 1972. So all of the student activism of the 1960s took place in a context in which the vast majority of the people who were protesting were disenfranchised. They didn't have the right to vote. And so, they didn't have the option of lobbying. They didn't have the option of doing electoral work except in, going out and knocking on doors to get other people to vote for candidates. And so, it's a two-pronged process now. You have the students who are protesting, and you also have a huge amount of lobbying that's going on, and maybe not as much as any of us would like to see. But I think that the fact that there is this two-front war being fought now is going to make this a very interesting year. I also think that in California itself, it's really crucial to see that this isn't something that's just happened. There were massive student protests in September. Many people have said that Berkeley saw the largest protest since the Vietnam War in September. That got not a lot of media attention, but it was going on. And just in the last 2 weeks, we've seen more than 100 students arrested. We've seen 8 buildings, I believe, taken over on 5 different campuses. We've seen campus police and local police using pepper spray, using tasers, using their batons, and the students keep coming out. So there is a level of intensity that's going on now, and a level of commitment to this movement from the students, which is distinctive. Now, having said all that, I think that there is a lot more going on beyond California than most people recognize. In large part because it doesn't make the media. Just as when students go to Sacramento or to Washington, D.C. to lobby, that's not something that makes the New York Times. That's not something that you get on NPR for doing. You do it, but it doesn't get you on television. And so there is a lot of that going on all around the country. And there's a lot of demonstrations. There's a lot of protests. There was a 600 student demonstration at the University of Maryland a few weeks ago that I didn't find out about until a couple of days ago. And I'm keeping track of this in a fairly rigorous way. There's a lot more going on even than the people who are paying attention recognize. And one of the things that's happening as a result of the California situation is that a lot of us are now beginning to both take a closer look at what's going on around the country, and also we're getting the opportunity to find out, because I'm getting a lot of calls right now from student newspapers and the like who want to write stories about comparing what's going on in California to what's going on in their own state and on their own campus. And that news hook is leading to more media coverage in the student media and in the larger media, and it's going to give us all a bigger picture of what's going on and what has been going on for years.
Mm-hmm. So all of this activism that we're hearing about, whether we hear about it through the national media or through events like this, at the local and state level, is it being amplified in any capacity to the national level? I'm going to go to you, Pedro, just to talk a little bit about the relationship between this type of activism and what's happening federally and legislatively.
Well, I think it's too soon to know what the effect of the protests in California is going to be nationally. But what I hope is that it brings back a focus to college affordability. It brings back a focus to the fact that college costs are rising really, really rapidly, and that student aid isn't keeping up. So as much as I agree that we shouldn't have a high-cost, high-aid model, that in the long run that's not a good idea, that we need to control cost and we need to provide substantial student aid in the short term, and I think even in the long term, you've seen student aid just sort of stagnate. The Pell Grant used to cover about 3/4 of the cost of a public higher education, and now it's about 1/3. That's really not acceptable. A lot of students are struggling. They're taking on more and more student debt, which is affecting not only the jobs that they can take on, but even when they choose to marry, buying a car, buying a house. And for the people who have the most problems, they're taking on these private student loans, the sector of the student loan industry that has grown really, really fast in the past decade. So hopefully, and these loans have very high interest rates. They have very few borrower protections, and a lot of times students have, private. They're not guided when they're taking out these loans, so they have a lot more than they should. And have a hard time paying them off. They can't even discharge them in bankruptcy most of the time. So I think hopefully what it does is bring back a focus to college affordability and bring back a focus to what Congress can do. And as Representative Bishop said, there's a pretty good bill in Congress that would increase the Pell Grants, that would invest in community colleges, minority-serving institutions. It would fund a lot of programs that would help expand access and make sure that people can graduate from college. And it does this in kind of a smart way so that we're actually learning from these programs on how to do things better. So that I hope that is something that people around the country are taking note of, that if they don't work on this issue, if they don't make this a priority, that we could see a lot more sit-ins in a lot more schools around the country. And I think that's about it.
So the bill that you were talking about, the Student Aid and Fiscal Responsibility Act, can you give us a little bit more detail about, A, what it is, and then B, what are its prospects? Is it inevitability? Because to us, it seems like a no-brainer. What are its prospects?
So what the bill would do is cut wasteful subsidies to student loan companies and invest that $87 billion that would be saved into student aid programs and other education initiatives. The bill has encountered a lot of, I think it has a very good chance, but it's encountered a lot of problems because student loan companies obviously don't want to see their subsidies cut, and they want to they wanted to keep something that looks substantially like the status quo, even though the status quo is so broken that Congress had to pass emergency legislation to keep it going. That this is something that I think is kind of interesting. I think back when the free speech movement started at Berkeley, you had universities, you had students, and you had lawmakers, and it was kind of, those are more or less the only people in the relationship. Industry occasionally wanted something, but now it's a much more complicated situation. You have student loan companies who are pushing really hard to define how student aid is given out. You have for-profit schools that are also very powerful politically, and who often are advocating things that are bad for students. And universities have taken on a lot more responsibility in their role, so that you have them interacting with a lot more people that have a lot more to say about what happens in college. So it's become a very complicated and tough situation, and I think I hope that these protests focus like a laser what should be the #1 concern of higher education, which is making sure that students get a quality education for an affordable price.
Well, Bruce, going back to your original comments, it sounds like, in theory, we all have the same goal, right? That we want to make college more affordable, more accessible for everyone, particularly low-income students, students from underrepresented communities. This is kind of what we all see as kind of the gold standard. Yet it's not happening. And so, your original question, I think, challenged student activism to say, be more focused, but I'm curious to know, is the administration effectively working with students, or is there, constantly this adversarial relationship?
I don't think there's an adversarial relationship inherent. I mean, it can happen sometimes. But I think there are different perspectives because, and I think particularly the perspectives are great when you get to research universities. We've been treating the public sector universities as one undistinguished mass, and that's not true. You have community colleges. You have, at least in California, you have the Cal States, which would be sort of the not necessarily as research-oriented set of universities, more teaching-oriented. And then you have the research universities. And the problems that we're talking about are particularly acute at the research universities. And we're not quite sure. We need to unravel as faculty what's driving up the costs. Part of it is the cost of doing research. We justify ourselves to the state because we do research. But it turns out that when the federal government cut the overhead on grants, we suspect that we've been, the students and others have been cross-subsidizing this research because we don't get the same amount of return. And yet that's how we justify ourselves in part to the state. It's not just educating you, it's because we're the engine of the economy. So we set ourselves up to be doing this research, but the whole economic model of that needs to be parsed out much more closely to understand what kinds of research are really driving the higher expenses. Is it because we have to have more regulatory people on staff? If you look at the growth of universities, it's not professors that have gone up, it's the number of administrators that have gone up, because to get the loans, you have to administer them. You have to have safety officers. You have to build new structures. You have to build new labs. So my point is, I think to be helpful, apart from joining forces and looking at the larger political context, we all have to take a very close look. If we're talking about controlling costs, what is it that's causing this proliferation of costs? And it may mean some hard trade-offs. It may mean that more kids shouldn't go to research universities. More of them should start off in the community college system and then work their way up. Or more of them should go to the Cal State system, because it's a very expensive model. When you have research faculty, they have to do research at least 50% of the time, which means you have to have lower teaching loads. You have to have teaching assistants. So we need to have a dialogue about that. Maybe that isn't for everybody, and we shouldn't be talking about that. And what is it that drives the kids, you guys, into the research university? Well, they're more prestigious because the faculty are more famous, but maybe you're not getting a better education. Maybe we need to rethink the whole master plan and say, look, you don't need to be at a research university if what you're really aiming to do is go on to business school or law school or whatever. You can get a very fine education at a lower cost where the professors do more teaching. In other words, I think there are internal questions that could come out of a very specific examination of the university costs. I don't think just having a protest and saying you're not trying hard enough or you're not thinking about the value of public education, I don't think that's the problem. I think everybody I work with cares about public education. It's just that we need to get on board about these trade-offs between various kinds of expenses if we're going to hold down costs, which is, I agree with all of you, is part of the equation of making college more affordable. And let me say one other thing. We haven't really said what the problem is of affordability. It really isn't that we're just going to have college for the rich. It's that we're going to have college for the rich and the poor, and not for the middle. And the real challenge for public schools, we will be able to take care of everybody up to $60,000. The real tragedy is that people between 60 and, name your number, 100, 120, are going to get no financial aid, and their bill is going to go way up. Now, I care less about the people in 100 and 120, but people in 60 to 70 or 80 will be stretched very hard. And that's where the private schools are doing a better job of handling that, because they don't take as many people in that category. The challenge for us is part of our responsibility is to educate large numbers of Californians. And so we have a lot of people in that category, and we need to focus on that category. I'm not as worried about the people making under 60,000.
I want to get, yeah.
I think, for us, I think, what, and this is throughout my conversations with the university administration, we're going to agree on 95% of the things, I think. But it's that 5%, that just, really is a thorn on your side.
What fraction of things do you agree with your parents?
Well, they're at home, so I'm at college. But I think for the most part, though, and to go back to your question, collaboration between the administration and the students is, excuse me, it's like what? It's very difficult because we haven't seen their arms outreach towards us in walking forward. And I can give you a few examples. We had a piece of legislation that was similar to what was called tuition relief now in California, which would have implemented a 1% tax on those who make over $1 million of taxable income and bring that revenue back into higher education, which specifically the University of California and the Cal States, the administration not only opposed it, but actively opposed it in lobbying against that piece of legislation, which was the student solution, right? Another one is that this year there's a piece of legislation in California that would put an oil severance tax on those who drill offshore. California is the only state that does not have an oil severance tax, and the university has not come out with a position on that piece of legislation, and it would bring in over $1 billion in revenue for higher ed. And so, when it comes to in terms of collaboration, it's been a very difficult road to walk because, we don't see eye to eye on a lot of things. But I think what we're starting to see, and I actually talked to our university president, Mark Udoff, and I got him to commit to actually showing up to Sacramento and marching with the students. So, Mark, if you're listening, I'll be expecting you in March. But and those are the first necessary steps. I mean, a lot of it goes back, and we have a historical kind of presence here of mistrust between the administration and students, and just not that working relationship. But it's going to take necessary steps, as us walking together in Sacramento, for them to make us believe, right, that the target is really the state capitol. The target really is the federal government. When we have all these things, that are coming out where, they're saying that our tuition is being pledged to take out capital bonds to fund construction projects, and a lot of these things, well, we don't know. We don't know because that relationship has been so fragmented and broken that it is a very tough road to walk, and I want to repeat that again. But going back to restructuring and re-looking at how, education in California should be, the choice should be that of the students, though. I feel that if they want to attend a research institution, it should be up to them. I don't necessarily feel that, we should, let me take your idea and tell you that it best fits over here. The point of the master plan was to provide an accessible education system, specifically a higher education system, for everyone. So regardless of where you wanted to go, and I have friends who did not go to college because for them, they decided that college wasn't for them. But if they wanted to go to college, they could have gone to any of the 3 segments had they been eligible. And I think that is the main thing that is at stake here, is that promise, right, that you would be free to choose where you would want to get an education is at stake here. So really, yes, it is about the 3-tier systems that we have in California or anywhere across the nation working together to provide that opportunity. But at the same token, that opportunity should be open and not one that kind of delineates specific avenues for students. Okay, if you want to do this, well, you have to go here. That the freedom to choose should be there, and I think that's a fundamental right, that we as students expect when we go into the university system.
So, go ahead, Pedro.
Oh, I just wanted to say something going back to a former point. I can't speak to the UC system. Any particular school system might have a different way that it handles low-income students versus middle-income students versus wealthy students. But if you look nationwide, you start having unmet need, which is that gap between all of your financial aid and your expected family contribution and the cost of attendance at around $70,000. But it increases as you go down. It's not a donut hole effect where you just have the middle class struggling. The further you go down in family income, the more problems you have. And I think this is really significant because on the federal level, but particularly on the state level, you have a lot of programs that aren't focused on need. They're focused on merit or something else, and a lot of the argument behind that is the middle class gets left out. I think this is really problematic because merit aid is fine, but you need to take care of that need first, or else you're going to have people who have a really hard time paying for college.
Just to kind of add on to that, talking about the middle class, yes, it's a big portion of the university population, and oftentimes kind of does get left out. But let's look at the work loan burden. In California, the work loan burden is $9,000, hovers around that number. You're already expected to pay $9,000 out of your own pocket to attend the university, and that has a severe detriment to you being able to pay for that. So regardless if you're middle income or lower income families, you need to shell out those $9,000. You're expected to in order to attend the university. And another thing is that we have undocumented students that attend the University of California. They themselves, who are not eligible for any kind of aid whatsoever, pay into the same system that we get, but they themselves cannot see any of that financial aid in return. And so there's a big problem here of just equity across the board of attending the university, and that is what needs to be addressed. And that goes back to the other point that I made, is that there's no real leadership to stand up to special interests, to stand up to the prison guards union, to tell them that, you know, we shouldn't be number one in prison spending. We should be number one in education spending. And I think that, you know, for us it comes as common sense, but for some reason we just have not seen that presence at our state at all.
So both inside California and outside across the country, we're seeing that students are really bearing the brunt and the burden of this kind of national problem. So I want to go back to you, Angus, and talk a little bit about, again, looking at student activism over the course of several decades up until now. I'm always intrigued by the relationship, if there is one, and I'm curious to hear your perspective on the relationship between rising college costs and student activism. Because I know I, for one, was a student. College was ridiculously unaffordable for me, like many people. I didn't organize, I worked. I worked multiple jobs and multiple hours, and so I wasn't out there at the rallies. And I'm very curious to see, is there a correlation between, you know, visible, vocal student protests and student demonstration and student activism as college costs increase?
Absolutely the kind of effect that you're talking about. You know, in the 1960s, the grant loan balance was about 80-20 grants to loans, and now it's pretty much reversed. And so there are more students working. There are more students who have jobs. There are more students who are worried about paying off their loans, and so they have more stresses. Even if they're not working, they have more stresses in terms of worrying about whether they're going to be able to find a job and doing the stuff that they need to do to make sure that they're employable when they get out. Also making sure they do the stuff to make sure that they're going to be employable in something that pays a lot of money, right? So, you know, a career in activism is generally not something that's going to lead you into a high-paying job when you get out. It's also the case that the nature of the student body has changed, right? You've got more older students, you've got more non-traditional students, you've got more students who are the first in their families to go to college and don't have the family infrastructure resources to help guide them through the process. You've got more students who have children of their own than you used to. And so all of this, and also the rise in community colleges, the rise in commuter schools, mean that there are fewer students who are living on campus in a campus environment where they can just walk across the quad for a rally rather than having to take a bus or a subway onto campus to get to the rally. So yeah, the changes in the nature of the student body and the way that higher education is funded have had a powerful effect on the ability of students to demonstrate. I also wanted to come back and say something a little bit more about sort of the role of students in setting an agenda for higher education. You know, there's a lot of stuff in terms of setting the future of a university. There's a lot of stuff that faculty can do on their own. You know, there are decisions that faculty can make on their own, and there are decisions, you know, even where they can't make it on their own, they have institutional power so that they can directly influence the course of the university. That's obviously even more the case for administrators. Students in general have very, very little institutional power in the university. There's very little that students can do to directly alter the course of the university. And so there are really only three things that students can do to have a direct impact. Number one is they can, you know, lobby in the legislature and get things done that way. The second is they can participate in governance, but they've got a very weak role in governance generally, and so that's mostly just sort of going hand in hand and asking people for favors. And the third is they can create a sense of crisis in the university. They can create a situation in which other people with institutional power inside and outside the university believe that something needs to be done. And so when you're looking at student activism, student organizing, student protest, I think it's important to recognize that the nature of the change that comes about as a result of student protest is only indirectly related to the actual demands that students are making. You know, students, going back to my earlier point, the demand for the youth vote, the 18-year-old vote, was not one of the huge demands of the student activism of the 1960s. Students were not out marching and rallying and occupying buildings to get the vote. What happened was that legislators on the federal level looked at the crisis on the American campus and said, there's stuff that we need to do. And one of the things that we can do in order to create an environment where young people feel more of a commitment to the system, they feel more invested in the system, one thing that we can do is give them the vote. And so students got the vote. Yes.
Because I was actually old enough to have been a student at that time. And I think you're missing a dimension of this, which is that we were also being drafted.
Yes, no, absolutely, absolutely.
And so the argument was, if we're going to be drafted, we ought to have the right to say whether we're going to be. So it's a friendly amendment. It's
yes,
not.
No,
it doesn't contradict anything you say, but I think there was a closer connection between those two.
Well, no, that's definitely a part of the context. But but students weren't going out and saying, if we're going to be drafted, we want to have the vote. That wasn't.
No, but what we were saying is, don't draft us because we don't have the vote.
Well, you were saying, don't draft us. and that was
I
one of the.
But that was our best argument.
Right. Well, yes, absolutely, absolutely. But the larger issue is that students create conditions in which the status quo becomes unsustainable, and the status quo alters as a result of that. And it doesn't always alter in the ways that students intend. It doesn't always alter in the direct ways that students are asking for. But it does alter. And so I think when we're looking at the effect of the current organizing on the future of higher education in California and the United States, I think it's important not to become too focused on, well, what is the exact nature of the demands that students are making? What is the exact nature of their agenda? Because there is a respect in which in which students are articulating a demand for change, which then is a demand that gets further articulated in the process as it goes on.
I want to agree with it.
Yeah.
I agree with it completely, and I think the protests are a good idea. I'd prefer you didn't destroy buildings or anything, but I think the protesting is very important, and I'll tell you why. Because I think as faculty we live in a bubble, particularly because what's happened in the last 30 years is student services have been given over to professionals in order to free us up to do our research and our teaching. And so it's only occasionally when somebody's come into your office hours and you're talking about their personal situation, or when you're writing a letter of reference and you get their biography, that you come into touch with the fiscal realities that the students are dealing with. And this is, again, it's a separation, a division of labor in a highly advanced organization separates the professors who 30 or 40 years ago would have been doing more of this kind of administration stuff, and now we don't do it anymore, so we don't see it as clearly. So I think showing the pain of the loan situation and the burdens and all that, I think is very important as a wake-up call to the faculty, because I think in the end it's not just about students in the administration, it's the faculty. The faculty have an enormous amount of power if they get energized and involved, and we haven't been involved for the most part. I don't want to get people mad, but a lot of the people that end up on these committees, these academic councils, are people that have basically retired from the classroom. They're not the best and the brightest in the university. Best and brightest avoid administrative work like the plague. The problem with that is we're not engaged then in the problems that you're talking about. And these are real problems. And to have you guys express your pain is extremely important, but it's not so much because the administrators don't know about it. It's to get the faculty engaged, because the faculty really need to get involved in this and think about these costs and think about the way we've organized ourselves, and and think about whether they need to teach more so that we can hold down costs. There's a lot of stuff that we need to be thinking about as faculty. So I think the student protests are very important. I think you should keep the heat on again without destroying any property, hopefully that will get a three-way discussion where you're not just talking to the administration, but the faculty are getting involved and coming up with ideas, because in the end, the administrators need faculty support or they don't stay in their jobs. And so if you can get the faculty to pay attention and to think through these problems more seriously, I think that will be that will yield better results than if it's simply handing it to the administrators.
So Pedro, we hear all that's happening at the state level. Angus just talked a little bit about the challenges of student organizing. again, as the burden to pay for college lays increasingly on the shoulders of the students. What's happening in Washington and in D.C. to support the students who are on the ground doing this work and fighting this fight daily, and also to advance their causes here at the national level and in Congress?
I think there's three co-sponsors to this event today. There's US PIRG, US Students Association, and Campus Progress. I think different organizations are doing different things to help students who are in the situation of Californian students right now. So USSA works very closely with the Student Association. They work very closely with other folks in California for organizing for state-level concerns and to translate these into national action. US PIRG also works really closely with all of us on making sure that the federal government is bringing aid to students. And at Campus Progress, we're also working on that. You've probably heard about our campaign, Students Over Banks, to try to pass the Student Aid and Fiscal Responsibility Act. But we also have a journalism program, so we're trying to keep people informed about college affordability issues and what's going on in California and other places. I think the most important thing that Congress can do is really start to make this a priority when it comes to getting more aid for students, and also other things like regulating private student loans, making sure that for-profit schools are properly regulated so they're not taking advantage of students. These are all concerns which in the larger higher education world across the country are really important and have been kind of put on the wayside for decades, really. In the past few years, Congress has finally started to focus on student aid, but let's hope that they're listening to students and the organizations that are trying to represent them, and not some of the other actors, the student loan companies that I mentioned before.
So I'm going to ask you all this one last question, and I want to get an answer from all of you, and then I might go to Q&A a little bit early because I know Bruce just said that he has to leave a bit early today. To deal with the financial crisis. So let me ask you all this last question. What's next? What's next after, and you answered however you want. If you want to talk about what's next in the UC system, fine. If you want to talk about what's next after Student Aid and Fiscal Responsibility Act, that's great. I'd also just love to hear what's next beyond fighting to increase student aid. I mean, beyond in the bigger picture of things, what is next on this agenda of college affordability? And why don't we start with you, Bruce?
I think that between the student protests, the faculty outrage, and the fact that the crisis in California is projected, according to the LAO office, to last 2 or 3 years. We're going to have structural deficits of $20 billion over the next 3 years. That this will be an ongoing discussion. It won't be a short window, which is usually a problem in California. We were able to recover from our crises so fast that we never get around to solving the structural problem. That's not going to happen this time. We're going to have a structural problem for 2 or 3 years. So I think there is a commission on the future of UC. The faculty are very skeptical about this process. We'll see if it does anything. It should generate discussions on the campuses, and rather than have it all be at this very mega campus level. But I think people have to hone in on the specific elements, I think, is where the conversation has to go next. It has to be about the student aid portion, it has to be about faculty workloads, it has to be about the research expenses, and it has to be about the governance structure for UC. All those things have to be considered much more seriously. And so, in the Obama sense, if we're going to put benchmarks on this, if this is our Afghanistan, I mean, the question is, are we making progress on specific policies in those areas? That's what I would be looking for.
I think for us, what's next? Well, we've been saying this for a while. Is that the steps of Sacramento, our state capital, are waiting for us, and I think you all will see that in the coming months. You will see thousands of people convene on Sacramento to make it known that that alternative sources of revenue are needed to make sure that vital entities of our state, specifically education and higher education, need to be protected in this time of crisis. And that we have to move forward with that. We need to push the leadership, our elected representatives, to do what they promised us they would do in moving this state forward. And quite frankly, this is a true test to their ability to run this state. But for us, what's next is pushing our concerns to the state capitol, pushing our concerns to the wider community, the wider public in California, and making it known that this is really just the beginning of what hopefully will be a kind of decades-long trend in student activism. But, you know, movement towards the ultimate goal of having free higher education, of having a free, accessible, affordable, quality, and diverse higher education, not only in California, but all throughout the United States.
I think one of the things that's next is, and it's beginning to happen already, is an explosion in the use of social networking, online social media, in the use of in this organizing. We're seeing a huge amount of use of blogging and email and Facebook, but also now, really for the first time, a use of Twitter. Which, for those of you who don't know, it's sort of short bursts of information. It's like a micro blog, and it's public. You can follow and you can read what other people are saying, and it's tremendously useful while a demonstration is going on or while a university building occupation is going on. You can get reports from inside. You can get people saying what's going on the ground. If there are police, what the police are doing, what the administration is doing, you have people making claims about what's going on, and then you have other people fact checking them in real time. And many of the protests and many of the occupations have not made full use of this yet, but one that did was the Wheeler Hall takeover at Berkeley. There was one guy at Berkeley who was who had a Twitter feed going, and he was not only providing reports from inside the building about what the students were doing, he was communicating with the students outside the building, and so allowing those two groups who were not in direct contact to be in direct contact, informing the nation and the world about what was going on, but also, crucially, in addition to just reporting on the events as they were occurring, as he began to build up an audience, he started posting statistics about the financial crisis and links to sources of information and pieces of the argument, the broader argument that was being made. And it was tremendously useful and tremendously successful. He went from having, when I started following him that morning, he had, I think I was the 46th follower on his Twitter feed, and there were 1,000 people following it by the end of the day, which is, an explosion which I hadn't seen the like of in any other organizing context. And so as students are getting more sophisticated about using these social networking tools, two things are going to happen. One is they're going to be able to get their word out a lot more effectively, and the other is there is going to become much more of a strong sense that all of these protests, both in California and elsewhere, are integrated, that they are all part of a movement. And that sense that students have of being part of a movement that's bigger than their single campus is a very large part, I think, right now of what's driving the continued energy throughout the country right now.
Great. Pedro?
So I think obviously Congress needs to continue to increase student aid. The Student Aid and Fiscal Responsibility Act is going to be a great step, but it's not going to get us back to Pell Grants covering 75% of college education. So they've set a great trajectory right now, a lot of folks in Congress, and they need to continue down that road. And I think, I think one of the most important things that can happen is that students start to continue to organize, use California as a model, really. They're one of the places that where students across the state in all the systems are organized statewide. They're very organized on their campus. They really create their own agenda. In a lot of other places, that's not the case. Students are scattered around the state. They're not organized. They take all of their cues, everything that they work for legislatively. They kind of take it straight from the administration. And that's fine. They should be working with the administration a lot, but they need to have their own vision, or else they're not going to be as effective. And they need to really investigate how their state is working, how the university is working, and how the federal government is working. And they need to make up their own minds about how that should happen and continue to work on it. For example, how does your school develop financial aid packages for students. Most students have no idea how their campus does this, and it's actually pretty difficult to find out. So maybe I'm just reliving my college days, but I think there should be a lot more watchdogging going on, or dog watching on college campuses too.
Great, thanks. I'm going to turn it over to the audience now. I know I see tons and tons of hands. A reminder that Bruce is leaving a little bit early, so if you've got questions for him. A lot bit early, so if you have questions for him, wiggle your fingers and I'll come to you first. But if not, okay, I see a wiggle. We'll start right here.
Hi, my name is Erin. I'm a correspondent for Philippine News. I'm actually the University of California, Berkeley alumni and alumni of UCDC. This question is for Bruce Kane. How do you think students will continue to participate in the University of California, Washington, D.C. program and the University of California Central Sacramento program pursuing internships in public service with the 32% increase in tuition and an additional proposal put in to require students to pay $2,000 to participate in these programs, particularly low-income and underrepresented students?
Yeah, well, I mean, this is what keeps me up at night. I mean, I have been making this point, and I think we've actually hit a turning point. Originally, the administration was toying with the idea of putting us completely not only on regular fees, campus fees, but having additional UCDC fees. And I whined and complained and cried and did everything and pointed out that if we did that for a program in public service, we would just be putting more debt on people that wanted to go serve in the Congress or serve in agencies or nonprofits, and that just wasn't going to work. And people did listen, and that's why I think you got to continue doing what you're doing, and all of us have to do what we're doing, because ultimately you can get through, you can make rational arguments. And so I think what's going to happen is that they will increase their Gen Fund support. They will consider alternative ways of getting financing in there. But you're absolutely right that if we don't get the model right, the very innovative program we have at the UC Washington Center will not flourish, and we will have fewer kids doing public service, and that would be a tragedy. So I completely agree with your concerns.
Mm-hmm. Another question, gentleman, right here.
Arnold King, and I'm a graduate of Prince George Community College, Maryland Shore, and DeBride University. I live in Prince George County, Maryland. And my two questions are, what caused grant to go from 20% in the 1960s to 28% today? Could be the student loan companies or something else. And also, what can we do to get students involved and take responsibility for dealing with the college administration and state governments?
All right, so the first question was what caused that switch in loans, and then the second is what can we do to get students more involved and taking responsibility?
On the first one, college costs have risen really fast since the 60s. In fact, in the last few years, they've risen faster than healthcare costs and other things that we consider to be getting really expensive very quick. That's part of the reason, and then the other reason is that it hasn't been as big a priority for lawmakers since I put the number at the mid 70s. You could move that up or down a little bit, but it hasn't been as big a priority to make sure that college is affordable, that people are getting an education, and as a result, they've let student aid levels stagnate or grow very slowly, especially relative to tuition increases. And they've also, on the state level, they haven't been keeping up their investment with college education. They've, the dollar amounts have gotten bigger, right? But the actual percentage that they've paid out, it just hasn't been keeping up. It's forced the university to increase tuition and to look for other sources of aid. And those other sources of aid, just like the state, are vulnerable during a crisis. So you've seen a lot of colleges in trouble recently.
To kind of touch on your question about how to get students involved, and organizing and the mentality that we have is that it is the issues themselves that bring people together, and there's no better way to do that than providing forums or educational events to educate people on what these issues are, to allow them to begin to plug into these different avenues that are available so that they can continue their advocacy. And I think that's one thing that's very important to remember is that, you know, on our campuses, there's got to be at least one person who has that information that's a student. There has to be that person that has that one information. Well, the key is to getting that information out there to the most broadest, audience that you can to make sure that the movement builds from there.
Great. Bruce has to literally leave right now, so we've got one last question for him. And, oh, this is hard for me to decide. Okay, yeah, let's go to the back. Let's go to this woman right there. Raise your hand again. We lost you. She was over here, but I don't. You can raise your hand one more time because we might. Oh, it was a gentleman. I'm sorry, right here. Yep. I know, with the beard. No.
That's right. I'm also a UC alum here in DC, and I'm wondering if you can address whether or not you think there might be any campaigns or movements going on in the maybe next year's election cycle or after that to address some of the more structural issues that you talked about and what we might be able to pay attention to and get interested in.
Well, there's a huge discussion about constitutional reform in California. I'm skeptical of whether we can get it off the ground and whether it will resolve any of the issues that we care about. I think some of the ideas that you suggested about earmarking funds, even though in principle I think that's a bad way to do state education, I think if I have to choose between that and giving campaign contributions and trying to bribe people, I think I'd take the earmarking. So I'd like to see you continue to push those ideas and bring them to the faculty. And I think don't just talk to Mark, talk to the faculty about that. I think they might be very interested in pushing that. That would be a very good campaign. But yes, there are broader structural problems. We need to reform term limits. We have to end what we call inverted democracy, which is to say we have a supermajority vote for budgetary matters, and we have a simple majority vote for constitutional matters. It's the exact opposite of what we have in the federal system. And as a consequence, everybody takes their case to the Constitution, and that gives us these rules that give inordinate power to the minority party. Does that have to be changed? Absolutely. Are people on top of that? Yes. The California Forward has a set of proposals. I would certainly hope that we will take a look at those, and the students will get behind the one to switch to a majority vote in California. And there may be others as well. So hopefully we can join forces in that. I would like to answer more questions, but I literally have to go deal with the fiscal problems of California.
Thank you so much for coming here, Bruce. And can people contact you or maybe perhaps?
Absolutely. And we would certainly be open to doing more events at the center on this issue in conjunction with you guys if you want to, or doing some joint study groups. Any way we can be helpful, please get in touch with us. We'd love to be a partner with you guys, okay?
Great. Thanks so much. Thanks so much. Yeah, sure. Victor's going to respond to that question as well, and then we'll take some more questions from the audience.
I think just to kind of add on, a lot of this is kind of looking at, what is for us specifically the gubernatorial race that's going to be taking place. Arguably probably the most important race since the 2008 election, right, for presidency. But what, Bruce mentioned is that the 2/3 rule. California is one of 3 states that needs 2/3 to pass any kind of budget. And, it holds up a lot of stagnation. I don't think we've ever passed a budget on time in California. To be honest. And so there are a lot of things that are expected to be coming up in recent elections, in coming up elections, and one of those things that I think that's kind of just building ideas is that, and I'm sure this is something that DC is very familiar with, the taxation without representation. We're approaching around 1/3 of the total amount of revenue that goes into making this university work. Well, where is that proportion represented on the decision-making board? So just to kind of leave that out there. But there are things that are going to be coming up.
Okay. Right there. Mm-hmm. Gentleman right there. Yep. Hand up. Works for her.
Hi. This is maybe a dangerous thing to say in CAP, but I am of the mindset that maybe we have too many attorneys in the world right now. And what, if anything, can be done legislatively to sort of make sure that America's great but private and very expensive fine arts and liberal arts institutions stay affordable for low-income people, because right now tuition for those sort of institutions are just sort of skyrocketing, ostensibly completely arbitrarily. And so can we do anything legislatively to sort of keep those costs down so that people who aren't rich can study poetry and art and music.
Anybody in particular have an answer on that?
I think a good approach would be the creation of entitlement programs, and those are very vital to providing, grant money that we don't have to pay back. I think most importantly, so that we can attend. And I think the idea that you have this binary between the social sciences, the more liberal arts, and the actual hard sciences, that does exist, right? But it's important to not make those compete against one another. But taking steps towards entitlement programs that create, funding sources or scholarships that would allow students to go into those particular fields, I think would be a vital next step that needs to be taken.
Another thing as far as controlling costs that Congress has sort of dabbled in, I don't think anyone's figured out exactly the best way to do it, is to find ways to reward and praise schools that are keeping costs to a minimum, and shaming schools that are not doing that. And also to make sure that states tie some certain kinds of funding to states maintaining their investment in college in their state. So I don't think they have a great way to control costs at the federal level yet, and there's some question of how and whether you want to do that. But they need to find some at least better ways to shame and reward.
I like making you run, so we're going to come back up to the front. This one right here.
Hi, my name is Clarixa Jimenez. I'm a graduate journalism student at American University here in DC. And there's a growing perception that students are putting themselves in a bad financial situation by choosing to go to more expensive universities like AU, GW, NYU, when they can get an equitable education at another institution. So how do you balance the discussion between, yes, the need for affordable college education and students who are choosing to get the $200,000 education when they could, in fact, go to a more affordable school? I mean, who are you advocating for? Are you advocating for those students going to GW or students who are just trying to get a college education?
I think, and this goes back to a point that was earlier. We're fighting for the opportunity to go wherever you want to go. And that's the freedom of choice in going where you want to go. So even though, yes, you could obtain an education that would suit your needs comfortably, right? There are people that want to go out and reach into those upper echelons of whatever those institutions are, right? Like the Georgetowns or the American universities out there. But the point is that we're fighting to preserve that equal opportunity that folks have to getting into these institutions. And so we're fighting for their affordability so that can be a case. Some folks might prefer to go to a state school rather than a prestigious university. But so long as they want to, well, that opportunity needs to be there, regardless of that fact. So I think it encompasses, both the opportunity and the affordability aspect there.
Well, I think it's an excellent question, and I think one of the crucial elements to me is that for a very long time in American history, one of the bedrock principles of American higher education was that your home state public higher education was going to be affordable. That whatever else was going on, your home state public higher education was going to be affordable. And in both California and in New York, where I'm from, 40 years ago, it was essentially tuition free to go to CUNY in New York City or to the public higher education in California. And that was a tremendously powerful engine for social mobility. It was the way that people lifted themselves out of poverty, was by being able to go and get a solid, high-quality, local public higher education. And I think one of the things that really needs to be talked about when we're talking about the increase in costs is that the costs have gone up as higher education has become democratized. The City University of New York was free when it was very exclusive, when it was really hard to get into. Students pushed for open admissions in the 1970s, and 3 years after open admissions came in, tuition came in. And those are not unrelated facts. And so, it's this paradox of political power that as more people who need help going to college start going to college, the amount of help that's available to them declines. And so I think that one of the problems with the privatization of higher education is that we have lost sight of the basic principle that higher education, in-state, public higher education, is something that should be accessible to everybody. That was a principle that we had as a country 40, 50 years ago, and it's something that we've lost sight of. And I think it's something we need to get back, and I think students are the ones to bring it back on the table.
So we have time for one more question, and then as we close, I'm sure you all will bum rush the stage and ask our panelists as many questions as you want. So I'm going to go with this woman right up here up front.
Anna Najum, I'm with Lincoln McLeod, a communications firm here in D.C. You're talking about student advocacy. What organizations or are there organizations of parents that are pulling their efforts together to support the efforts of their children who are desiring to have a great life in society?
That's a good question. I think that we've been already talking about this for a while now. Is how do we engage our parents to get involved? I know for all of us who went to high school or some kind of schooling that when the parents spoke to the teacher was listening. Same thing with the administration. They kind of shivered if the parents had any kind of problem with what the education of their child was doing. Well, for us, it should be that same mentality. Oftentimes for a lot of families, and this may not be the case for everyone, but the parents are the ones that have to do the financial planning, right? That are directly connected to actually paying for their students, for their kids to go to the university system. But there are no real clear organizations out there for parents to start organizing, and that is a need. I mean, this has to be something that includes a multiplicity of entities, right? And parents are definitely, and they have to be part of that fight, along with the faculty, along with the students, along with the staff and administration. But no, there's really no clear organizations out there for parents that we know. I mean, we know the PTAs are out there, but we need something. I think there's definitely a need for something up there that would organize parents around the higher education level.
Let me just follow up on that very quickly. I make 2 points. One is I think it's really important to remember that a lot of people in these colleges are not kids right now. That there are a lot of people who are adults. Well, everybody is an adult who's in college, but there are a lot of people who are not being paid by their parents. And not to step on your question, but I think that in the dialogue that we're having, we need to remember that fact. The other thing that I think is happening, which is really exciting, is that student activists are learning how to frame their protests in a way that will engage and mobilize parents. And the best example of that I've seen is the library occupations that have been taking place in California and elsewhere in the last few months, where what happens is that in protest against reduced library hours, students will arrive at a library and occupy it for a limited period of time, not an open-ended occupation. They say, we're just going to come in and we're going to keep the library open so that it's available for students to study. And we're going to keep it open for 24 hours. We're going to be gone in 24 hours. You don't need to worry. You don't need to call the cops. We're just going to come and we're going to study. We're going to have teach-ins. We're going to, inform people. The media absolutely loves these protests because it's students studying in. It's an incredibly brilliant idea. And one of the things that happens every time there's one of these library study-ins is that the administration starts hearing from parents and alumni. Because they find out, they didn't realize before that library hours were being cut. They think it's ridiculous that library hours are being cut, and they start calling in and writing in to put pressure on the administration to restore library hours. And that is the one area of student protest so far in California that I'm aware of where students have seen direct, concrete victories in terms of administration policy. The library hours have been restored at several universities after they've had these protests. So I think organizations of parents may be something to consider, but I think it's also absolutely critical that students figure out how to send a message that will first reach and then resonate with parents and alumni and other people outside the university.
Well, that's okay, really quickly wrap it up.
Alumni are, particularly in an era of privatization, they are hugely important in the funding stream of colleges and universities. colleges and universities depend on alumni donations. And so alumni have a tremendous amount of power because they are fickle. You know, it is easy to convince an alum to stop donating to your college or university. And so when alums start calling up and saying, you know, I'm concerned about this, the administration pricks up their ears.
That's a really good place to close. I mean, on behalf of Campus Progress, our co-sponsors, the United States Student Association and the U.S. Public Interest Research Group, U.S. PIRGs, we want to say thank you all so much for coming. We definitely answered the question, is college only for the rich? No. How do we get there? There are a lot of solutions at the national, state, local, and institutional level, but one thing that we're certain is that students must be a part of that solution and will be at the forefront. So thank you all so much for coming.